Today we're looking at coordinating and subordinating conjunctions. Conjunctions are linking words. There's nothing to be afraid of. They're words like this, which are all coordinating conjunctions, and they're words like this, which are all subordinating conjunctions. Now, I look at these in detail in another video called Linking Words, about what their use is, if they're used to contrast or to give additional information or to introduce a conditional. So please watch my Linking Words videos. I've got 2 videos about those if you want to know about their meaning and their use. This video will look at their use, but it will look in particular at their use with punctuation, in particular the comma. Now, I've already got another video on the comma, so please watch that if you want more information than just this, because there is more to learn. I'm going to be talking about these conjunctions, and I want to contrast them because they're not the same. These are coordinating conjunctions, and that means that they join 2 independent clauses when they're acting as a coordinating conjunction. Now, you may immediately notice that this word and, for example, it doesn't have to be used between 2 independent clauses. It could be used, for example, in a list. At the end of a list, you say, I bought from the shops some apples, some oranges, and a banana. Now, in that sentence, we don't need to split 2 independent clauses. We're just writing a list. We do need commas, and in my opinion, well, I would use the Oxford comma still before the and, but that's not what we're talking about at the moment, the list. We're going to talk about the 2 independent clauses. Now, you think about it, there's 2 different ways we can use and. We can use it like this. We went to the beach, and I brought my camera. Now, I want you to notice that this, it's an independent clause. What do I mean? I mean that this sentence makes sense on its own as a capital letter I and a full stop here. I brought my camera is fine on its own. It's got a subject, a verb, and an object. It's an independent clause. Also, this is an independent clause. We went to the beach. It's got a subject, a verb, and an object. So, these are independent clauses, and we need a comma before the and. Please put the comma, it goes before the conjunction, okay? Not after the conjunction, but before the conjunction. However, if you look at my other example down here, I wanted to show you this one to illustrate. You don't use a comma when we only have one independent clause. So, I brought my camera and a towel. Okay, there's no list there, so we don't need an Oxford comma, and it's just a camera and a towel. This is not an independent clause, a towel, it's just a noun, so we don't need the comma here. The same goes for another word here, or, and for several other words here. You only need the comma when it's joining 2 independent clauses. So, shall we go to the beach, comma, or shall we go home? Independent clause and independent clause. However, if you say, shall I bring my camera or a towel? You don't need a comma here before the or, because you're just using it between 2 nouns. Okay, so only when you're using it to join 2 independent clauses do we need a comma before, on this side, before one of these coordinating conjunctions. Now, a comma splice is a very common mistake, so I thought I'd mention it. Perhaps the most common comma mistake. I love juggling, comma, it's a great hobby. This cannot be correct. It's wrong. And it's because you've got 2 independent clauses. I love juggling, it's a great hobby, but you've got no conjunction. You've got no coordinating conjunction. And so to make this correct, we need to add and or because would work nicely here. I love juggling because it's a great hobby, and then we're using a subordinating conjunction and it's correct, okay? But we can't just join 2 independent clauses with just a comma in the middle. We need some kind of conjunction, or alternatively you could even split them up into 2 sentences. I love juggling, it's a great hobby. Or you could even join them with a semicolon, and then of course there's no capital here. If that's the case, then well, if you want to learn more about semicolons, go to my lesson on colons and semicolons. I'll put a link on the video. But yeah, so there's a number of choices, but what you can't do is that. That's certainly wrong. Much better to put a full stop and a capital letter, or a semicolon, or a conjunction. So don't make the mistake of a comma splice. There's another list of words here. Though, although, after, before, while, because, as, since, if, whether, as if, unless, until. So a lot of these are conditional connectors. Some of these are relative pronouns, which, that, who. We'll talk about them in a moment. But some are the typical linking words which you can see on my other video, and which you really must use, especially in your writing. It will really improve your marks to use good linking words and good conjunctions. Now, here we have to remember something again to use the comma correctly. If we have a main clause, well, we always have two clauses with these conjunctions. We have a main clause and a subordinate clause. Usually this word introduces the subordinate clause. Now, a subordinate clause is not a main clause because it cannot stand on its own. Let's take first conditional as an example. If I study hard, I will pass the test. If I study hard is a dependent clause. It can't stand on its own. You can't say, if I study hard. It doesn't mean anything. It needs another clause to get some meaning. So it depends on the main clause. If I study hard, the main clause, I will pass the test. Okay? So we can always split up a sentence with a subordinating conjunction into a main clause and a subordinate clause. Now, the order of these clauses is very important for the comma. So let's come back to first conditional. I've already told you on another video or several other videos that if we start with if, then we need a comma. And this is because we are starting with the subordinate clause and then we have the main clause, in which case we need a comma in the middle. Okay, separating the two clauses. So if I study hard, comma, I will pass the test. However, if we say I will pass the test if I study hard, we don't need a comma here. There's no comma. Okay, so think about first, second and third conditional. But the same goes for all these other words. After going to the cinema, I went home. I went home, comma, after going to the cinema. Okay, as long as you start with the subordinate clause, and I've done it wrong there, sorry. Almost. I went home after going to the cinema, no comma, because this is the main clause. I'm sorry about that, everyone. Everybody makes mistakes. But after going to a cinema, this doesn't mean anything on its own. After going to the cinema, it doesn't mean anything on its own. So we've started with the subordinate clause. We need a comma, and then I went home, the main clause. Okay, so just make sure you use a comma when you start with a subordinate one. There is an exception with because, which I speak about on another video, and it's in negative sentences with because, when there is a situation when you have because in the middle, so you have the subordinate clause second, however we still use a comma, and it's in some negative because clauses. Please watch the other video to find out more about that. Now, I mentioned here 3 different types of clause, of subordinating clause. There's an adjective clause, which could be a defining subordinate clause or a non-defining subordinate clause. So, the man who I met yesterday is defining. We define this man with the who I met yesterday. It's essential for us to know who the man is, to say this, who I met yesterday. And in defining clauses, we don't use a comma. However, in non-defining clauses like the following, my twin brother, who is a maths teacher, has long hair, this is just extra information. And so this is a non-defining clause. This doesn't define it. This is already defined. It's clear who it is. It's my twin brother. I've only got one. And this is extra information about him. So it's non-essential. It's certainly not defining information. And so we use a comma around each part of that. I've got another video on relative clauses. For more details, go and see that video. There are adverbial clauses as well, which are perhaps a little bit quite often used in conditionals like this. I worked with him until the sun set, or until the sun set I worked with him. I'm sorry, that's not a conditional at all, but this part is the adverbial clause. It's the subordinate clause. It doesn't make sense on its own, until the sun set, and so when we start with it we need the comma. Okay, make sure you don't get confused like I did earlier with these two. And lastly, you can have a noun clause. So all of this part functions like a noun. Whoever gives me a like is my hero. So this is the subject. It's a noun clause. So please give me a like, and thanks for watching, everybody. And please ask some questions about this if you have any under the video. Thanks a lot.